Hi everyone, this is Dawson from Dawson back again. This is the third in a series of 3 videos on the Waimea Dam fiasco. The first one was not needed and won't work, the second one was cost and risk, and this third one is about following the democratic process, openness, transparency and a democratically accountable manner. This does not only apply to councillors, but it also applies to local government servants or employees. Let's consider this issue of predetermination or bias, often used interchangeably with conflict of interest. Conflict of interest legally involves money and bias predetermination is self-explanatory. Advice from the Office of the Auditor General: if in doubt, stay out. With a strange qualifier, if it's highly significant, then you may compromise on your interpretation of if in doubt, stay out. They also said that you should consider if you have a close relationship with organisations that will be affected by the dam. If you have a close relationship with dam groups, then you should seriously consider whether you should be involved. And advice given at a council meeting was you should take a cautious approach to conflict of interest. In my opinion, too many councillors took a cavalier approach to conflict or bias, and that to me was not satisfactory. Let's now consider the issue of 2 key members of council, one the long-term Mayor Richard Kempthorne and his deputy Tim King. Tim King is the current Mayor. So the issue of bias or predetermination would seem to apply to them because they have had a long-term and close involvement with the irrigation group Waimea Water Augmentation Committee, whose stated aim was to build a dam. So in 2009, Mayor Richard Kempthorne acknowledged that he could be perceived as having a conflict, so he stood down from the irrigation committee. Tim King also acknowledged that there was a perception of conflict or bias, so he said that he would not vote in council meetings on dam matters. I'll repeat that. Current Mayor Tim King said that he would not vote on any issues at council meetings in relation to the dam. He did not follow his own advice. So after it was raised at a public forum, this issue, Mayor Richard Kempthorne said that, reported in the newspaper, that WIWAC, the Irrigation Committee, was set up to represent a broad cross-section of the community. Well, that's fine, but the issue is when he and Tim King are on council, given their long-term association with this irrigation committee, the perception amongst the average ordinary person on the street is that they would find it very hard not to be biased. Secrecy. Workshops are closed shops. They're not for the public and they're not for Murray Dawson. I asked the Mayor on a number of occasions and the Chief Executive on occasions about attending a workshop in a listening capacity only, not being allowed to partake but just to listen. In brief, the Mayor's answer was no, it's not for the public, it's just for our council staff to talk to councillors, give them information without the possibility of it being challenged. So the email from the Chief Executive is as below. And so provisions around public forum attendance do not apply to workshops. Okay, so what's the relevance of that? We adhere to this practice, whatever this practice is, and I think the practice is we don't have to let you come to a workshop and listen, so we're not going to. A very, very opaque and undemocratic attitude to take. Let's consider a clear case of a lack of openness. TDC were asked to guarantee a loan guarantee 29 million, cost overruns 100 million, and a compensation event up to 50 million. Significant contingent liabilities. This was when Tasman District Council guaranteed the loan between Crown Irrigation and Waimea Irrigators Limited. It wasn't transparent because these were not specific motions, they were wrapped up in a catch-all resolution. They were passed by implication. Some councillors were unhappy with this, understandably, and they put it to the vote that councillors be allowed to see these term sheets. Unbelievably, 6 voted against this. Mayor Kempthorne, Councillor King, Councillor Bryant, Councillors Brown, Sancton and Tupperell. They said, no, you don't need to see the sheets, just vote on them. If you're a company director, this would be a complete lack of due diligence. And in the case of a company director, would well have legal consequences. Consequences for councillors, there's no legal consequences. Consequences for Tasman District Council ratepayers could be well in excess of $100 million. Extraordinary confidential meeting. Who called this meeting? I'm not quite sure, but given that the report was authored by the Chief Executive, it could well have been the Chief Executive, possibly at the suggestion of the Mayor. So how can you have a new meeting to revoke a resolution passed 9 days before? You can if there's significant new information. Councillor Greening challenged the legal basis for calling this meeting. He quoted standing orders. However, the Mayor dismissed his opinion and said we're going ahead. So what was this significant new information? A 10-year interest-free loan is now 20 years interest-free. No change there, effectively. Waimea Irrigators Limited agreed to a marginal increase in their funding obligations. That was hardly significant new information. And that there was now the option of having hydroelectric generation. That did not require any urgent, special, extraordinary meeting either. This meeting was a total contrivance set out to revoke the previous resolution, a 9-day-old resolution, which effectively suspended the dam progress. Let's consider a very significant report prepared by Dam Watch for Crown Irrigation in reviewing the dam project. So this came out on the 24th of December, day before Christmas, guaranteed not to be read for several weeks. Perhaps that was just unfortunate timing. However, the crucial thing was that this report raised significant issues. The 3 most important ones were that the geotechnical interpretations were poor. In fact, as has been proven, they were woefully deficient. Shared risk, they weren't shared risk, they were entirely the responsibility of Tasman District Council. And thirdly, the risk had not been adequately costed. With realistic costings, they were much greater. So the relevance of this is that a draft of this report was seen by some council staff the 18th of November, a couple of weeks before the sign-off meeting at the end of November. As far as I'm aware, this information was not made available to councillors. It was not flagged to them that there was a report raising serious issues. I think it was incumbent upon the staff to do so, and they didn't. So let's look at a transparent representation of how much water is needed to augment the Waimea River at the monitoring site. This is where 1.1 QMax is required, minimum flow under the current regime. So I've prepared this graph, which is pretty self-explanatory. This is the shortfall in water over these years by volume compared to the volume of the dam. So in 2018-19, 10-15% at the most would be needed to supplement the flow. 2005-2006, 20%. 2001 maybe 50%. There's not a lot of full data there, so that's an estimate. So all the other years, very little water is required. So if data was presented to councillors in this form, that would have given them a clearer picture of the actual water requirements. They may have had a different opinion on whether a 13 million cube dam was required. Let's consider this notion of the dam will release enough water to improve the health of the river. There's so little water released that it will make no difference. But anyhow, there's a big lie technique being used. That the big lie technique is you repeat the story often enough, it gains a certain currency and people start to believe it's true. So you can read what I have on screen while I talk about it. Essentially it is that the dam release water will help resolve the issue of toxic algal blooms. It won't. Even though Nick Smith in his newsletter said that it would eliminate the problem. What is the answer? Given by Roger Young of the Cawthorne Institute. Dam release waters maintaining a minimum flow will have no effect on toxic algae in the lower Waimea River. That's the answer. Salt, never been an issue. If it was, it would be soon flushed out. How often has it been an issue? Once. 2001 for a week, a very minor salt recording. It was not an issue. Salt issue has been vastly overstated. It's another thing that's been repeated so often that people start to believe it is an issue. It isn't. So let's look at a graph here that was presented to councillors as an example of the effect of groundwater pumpages have on the flow rate of the river. So both starting from the same point in the upper measuring site in the gorge. Summer it finished down here at the lower site, and winter it was higher here. 800 litres a second is lost, supposedly due to groundwater pumpage. So let's consider three things. Firstly, 1600 litres a second where it started in the winter. No evidence of that in the Tasman District Council database. 2000 litres was the minimum they had. That's 400 discrepancy accounted for. Secondly, in summer, about here, Waimea East pumped 300 litres a second from the river. So that now is a total of 700 litres a second accounted for in this discrepancy. The remaining 100 litres a second can be accounted for by the aquifer in winter being 40 centimetres higher and contributing more to the river flow. So this is an example of a misuse of information to justify this false notion that groundwater pumpages have a significant effect on the river flow. They don't. So let's look at an example of a blatant misuse of information by Tasman District Council staff. This information has been used to justify the funding split with the Tasman District Council overfunding the dam. If you used correct data, they would be funding less. So let's look at current demand. They used 26,000 cubes a day. It wasn't true. Their own database said the maximum was 13,000. They've doubled current demand. That was 2013, but a similar situation applies today. Future demand, they used 60,000 cubes, when in fact their own commissioned report said 30,000 cubes a day. So once again, to suit their own funding agenda, they have doubled future demand. So the net effect of all of this is that Tasman District Council is overfunding the dam. A response from Richard Kirby by email said, if we didn't do this, no one else would take up the commitment. Well, too bad, I would say. Let's deal on the basis of honesty. Let's use accurate information. Let's be open with the community. Let's be open with councillors. Let them decide on the basis of accurate information. Let's now have a look at the results of a questionnaire which went out in parallel with the Tasman District Council consultation 2017. So this questionnaire was prepared by Water Information Network. It was prepared in part because the questionnaire sheet sent out by Tasman District Council was phony, had patchy questions, it evaded the issue. So we decided to ask the questions which you ratepayers would want to answer. So I'll just read out a few of the questions here. The graph on the right, the red bars show the proportion that said no to these questions, and the green part are those that said yes, they wanted it. So should Tasman District Council accept liability for cost overruns, a liability of which is now over $100 million? More than 80% in all of these said no to all of these questions. At the time, the cost overruns were, the likelihood of them was minimised, almost certain not to happen. They had a contingency, nothing to worry about. Should TDC guarantee $29 million loan? More than 80%? Absolutely not. Number 3, should TDC commit $14 million for environmental community benefits? By the way, today that's north of $50 million and rising. You can see what the response was to all of these questions. A resounding no. So what notice did the majority of councillors take of that? On the evidence of their voting, none. Democracy at work. Now this, I think, is an indictment of staff, some of the staff at Tasman District Council. Effectively, they have adopted a partisan position. They want a dam. Certainly, if you consider what they said in the reports, that's what they want. So, in a report, it said to councillors, this is after the submission report came back, show leadership. You know more than everybody else. What do the public know? Well, at least the public weren't misinformed mostly. And a lot of the public staff of Tasman District Council are just as capable as you are of making up their mind. And by the way, councillors are capable of making up their mind just by seeing the results of the survey and not having you steer their thinking towards dismissing well thought out, genuine responses from the community. So for example, if we didn't ask the question in our statement of proposal, then you should not consider what the public think. Yes, we know Wynne had this questionnaire sheet and people put their responses in, but you should ignore them. Because after all, they are the noisy minority. We know the silent majority support us. So councillors, you should take note of what the staff think. So because with modern technology, it is so easy to put these negative reports in. By the way, the vast majority of reports were written on a form and handed in. Certainly the vast majority of Wynne questionnaire responses were filled out on the sheet and handed in. So it's insulting anyway to consider these people a noisy minority. They should be utterly ashamed of themselves for putting it down in writing. So anyhow, you noisy negative minorities, your input was dismissed. So let's continue with this theme of democracy. Better a community-driven than a council-driven project. Joseph Thomas, who was the project manager for the dam for the Augmentation Committee and also was a water resource officer for Tasman District Council. So why not have a referendum then if you want to know what the community think. Now, I know there's arguments against referenda, but in this case, given the magnitude of this expenditure, even at 100 million, it well deserved a referendum. So in the discussion about this, after a motion was brought up by Councillor Mark Greening and Dean McNamara, a couple of councillors said comments like, "Oh, street talk is, pretty positive, and people I talk to think the dam's a good idea." Those two councillors voted against the referendum. So they wanted a binding referendum be voted on first, whether to fund the dam, community to fund the dam. So these were the ones who voted against it: Councillors Brown, Bryant, King, Mailing, Sangster, Tufnell and Mayor Kempthorne. And a non-binding referendum was also lost by the same vote. It's interesting to note that Mayor Richard Kempthorne used his casting vote. In other words, he voted twice. So it's certainly time for a conclusion. If you've watched the whole 3 videos up until now, you've watched more than an hour. So I'm going to indulge myself a little bit, but it's also relevant. I'm going to read out what I wrote in a 2019 report as a conclusion. So the dam will be built, cost will increase significantly. That was true. It will not function as intended. It will be declared a success. Photos taken, ribbons cut. Important people there. The lesson is that council should be a control of projects, particularly large ones, from the inception. Coming in at an advanced stage is extremely poor governance. Now, council use coercive rating powers given to them by the state, of course, and they should not take money off their citizens without their consent. A council should pay more than lip service to the basic principles of openness, transparency and consultation. And most importantly, councillors should listen to their constituents. Okay, so the dam's being built and that won't be changed, neither making videos or anything else. So what can and should change is the culture of the council. And you now have your chance to play your part. So it's Murray Dawson. I trust you've found these videos useful. And my very best wishes to the people in Tasman. You're going to need it for the future.